Good morning, everyone. Bonjour. Kwe. My name is Archie Martin. I'm Mi'kmaq Métis from Eastern Canada, and today we're here to make a video on our history, our culture, and our traditions, especially traditions which are still alive today within Métis people, also First Nation. Because culture and traditions remains they don't really die out. Okay, I'm just going to start with maybe a lecture on a book that I acquired, which is called The Ghost Brothers, which illustrates different stages of when the Europeans came and started and established communities here in Eastern Canada. As you know, it took us 200 years before we had moved out west. So from the east, you have a history of about 400 years, and out west, you have a history of approximately 200 years. So I'll just read a few passages from this book. Will give you an idea. We'll start talking about the royal policy based upon Champlain's assessment. And this was both possible and beneficial, okay, to the 100 associates. To explain to you the 100 associates, they were located, these 100 associates were located in Montreal, and they certainly wanted the fur trade, and they wanted trading, and this was their way of being able to do business with a First Nation, okay? And especially the Métis people were doing business with the 100 associates in Montreal, and these 100 associates were French, okay? Now, the 100 associates naturalized as French with full legal capacity and the right to move to France. That's what we got from the 100 associates, is that the king wrote a letter, okay, to the French, to the Métis people, and also to the how can I call the people intermarrying between French and First Nation. I'll just read here was my, okay, descendants. It's in French, so I'll read you the letter in French, okay? Because it's wrote in French, it was wrote by the King of France. The 100 associations naturalized in French, okay. Ordonne à Sa Majesté que les descendants des François qui habiteront le dit pays ensemble des sauvages qui seront emmenés. La connaissance de la foi et en feront profession seront censés et réputés naturels François. Et comme tels pourront venir habiter en France quand bon leur semblera, et accueillir, tester, sudesser et accepter donations illégales. In other words, this letter is if a First Nation took the Catholic faith, okay, they were allowed to move to France at any time that they wanted because they had now become subjects of France. Also, all Frenchmen that had intermarried, okay, with First Nation, okay, were allowed to move to France at any time that they wanted to go back to France. This letter gave them the legal right to go back to France, okay? The legal rights are much more extensive than in New England, Virginia, or New Spain. Métis children had the same rights as their parents. This means that this law only covered New France, okay, when the king gave the letter to New France. When Three Rivers was established, Champlain declared that French and natives would intermarry and from one people, okay, in 1637, when the Jesuit priests at the Atinaouatan Bear tribe, Wendat chiefs, a Frenchman could marry Wendat woman. The chiefs were surprised and responded that they had always done so without any permission from them. In other words, they had been intermarrying because Champlain had asked them that before, if it was okay for the French to marry a native woman. For sure, is the reason why that the one that were not there at the time of the request, they were intermarrying with all different nations, even the one that would be the Hurons, they would be intermarrying. It was just a policy that was automatic now for the French to marry into all the tribes with no problem. Okay. Another thing also is that they wanted to intermarry the French to the native. Is that the encourage that was in Montreal. Okay, in 1660, Colbert and Louis XIV encouraged intermarriage as so not to depopulate, because they wanted to populate the whole area, so they wanted that to populate, not to depopulate the province. Early French policy favoring métissage contrasts sharply with the spirit of official British policy, which frowned upon mixed unions. In other words, they didn't want intermarrying because they didn't want that mixture. But in Acadia, they were encouraging the intermarrying with no problem at all. A letter published in 1758 in London by Monsieur de Varennes stated, "We employ as much more actual methods of uniting them to us, intermarriage. They, Acadians, were a mixed breed of savage women with the first settlers." As Bailey noted, citing l'Abbé Murau, there was more or less intermarried between the settler and this tribe, Mi'kmaq, which more firmly cemented the bonds. Métissage was an important feature of the founding of Port Royal, Nova Scotia. The Britons and the Basques, more than any other European people, seem to have exerted the wildest influence upon the Maliseets. And the Maliseets, they had a name for the Métis. That's something that's I was surprised to learn. They call us Maluidit. Maluidit. The name was given to the Métis among the Maliseets. While the fluid measurement of living Maliseets and Mi'kmaq are now unconsciously mixed, the French-Canadian blood and l'Abbé Murau believed that marriage with Indians were so frequent in 1607 to 1675, when European women were so scarce that there were few Acadian families with no Indian blood in their veins. Another thing that they gave them, any Frenchman that intermarried with the First Nation, that was dowries. A dowry of 3,000 livres was given, and also there was a policy that was taken out that to teach young Native women, there was other dowries that was given for them to teach them the way of European, but there's not too much First Nation that was acquiring the dowries for that. But in the intermarriage of the 3,000 livres was acquired. So just to give you an idea, just a quick history. Okay, now we're going to go more like in the culture, and right now we're at the time of the sugaring off time, and the sugar, as you know, the sugar, maple sugar, is an important factor for First Nation, because after a whole winter of not having all the things that they needed, sugar was very, very well accepted, and they knew that the sap was going to start to run, and they had a way to know when the maple sap was going to move up the tree. As soon as the crow started to caw, the sap started to run. At the end, how they knew when it was finished and there was no more sap going up the tree is when the geese came in the form of the V, and they heard the call of the geese, the sap started to run. But in the eastern part of Canada and in Manitoba, okay, we don't have big maple trees as we have here in Quebec and in Ontario. The center of Canada is where they have the most and the biggest maple trees. Now, at the east, we had what we call birch trees, and we had birch syrup. And in Manitoba, they're starting not to have maple trees. Then they have a lot of birch trees in Manitoba. So it's about the same. The culture doesn't really change, and the tradition on that doesn't change. It depends on your location. And so what we did, okay, the Mi'kmaq people, we took the sap from the birch tree, because the birch tree was a tree that gave us a lot of good things. It helped to make our wigwams, to fabric our canoes, and also we used the sap to make maple sugar. The first thing that we gave the Europeans when they came, the gift that we gave to Jacques Cartier in the 15th century at the Baie des Chaleurs, we didn't give them a bottle of maple sugar or maple syrup. We gave them little cakes, and these little cakes were so well liked by the Europeans, and they were calling the cakes Indian sugar. So Indian sugar was traded for furs, it was traded for many items, that the sugar was traded as much as the sugarcane sugar. That comes more from the south. But here it was the maple syrup from Quebec, and then they're making cakes here in Quebec also, candy. But the liquid was very hard to transport. So what they had to do, they had to reduce it into making maple sugar or maple candy or toffee, okay, the toffee that you see in the maple. It hasn't changed since the time of the first arrival of the Europeans, and even into the intermarrying with the First Nation, sugar time has not changed that much. The only thing that has changed is it's not the way they make it, it's just the pots. Okay, the equipment that was traded with the Europeans make it more easy, okay, and they have the knowledge today. You can make maple syrup very fast because maybe they're in a hurry. But at that time, First Nation and the Métis had all the time they wanted to be able to make the maple sugar, okay, and I remember as being a young man, we were making the syrup from the birch tree, but I don't know if you ever went to a sugar shack. The gentleman comes out with his syrup, and he has a bed of snow, and he pours his hot syrup on the snow, and you take your little stick and you turn it on the snow with the syrup, and right away you have toffee. You have maple toffee. The way we used to do it, we had a little cone, okay, made from the birch tree. We made snowballs. Everybody knows how to make a snowball. Incorporated on the cone, and we dipped it into the syrup. And when we took it out, we had a not an ice cream. We had toffee, we had birch toffee, and we ate the snow at the same time because the snow becomes it's not like flaky snow in the spring. It's like granule snow. So it was we were drinking and eating our toffee at the same time. It hasn't changed. It's the same thing as it was, when I was young. And my ancestors were doing the same thing, and the Mi'kmaq, the Maliseets, Passamaquoddies were doing the same thing as we do today, but in a different manner because, as you know, they had dug out trees, they had to heat hot rocks in the fire, put it into the sap, reducing it with the hot rocks, and acquiring, because they did not have no pots, it didn't have no pans, and it was a slow process, but they were making a lot of maple sugar, each tribe, because the tribes were quite large, especially the Mi'kmaq had 7 territories, and we had, now living with them, the population has risen because there's more people coming into the tribes, more intermarrying in the tribes, and by more intermarrying, more Métis, and this is something that was very, very important because we had, in other words, when I was a young man, we were not like, I could see a difference, but it was not a big difference because we all lived together. In other words, like I tried to explain, we're all under the same umbrella. Métis wasn't apart from First Nation, or the Mi'kmaq were not apart from us, or the French were not apart from us, or what we call the French Acadians. We're all one people living together, and the traditions and the customs were a little bit different, okay? But another thing, they were incorporated into one another. It wasn't like we weren't separate, but we all lived together because we had other nations living with us. We had Irish, Scottish, we had German, we had Lebanese, we had Portuguese. All these people came from different areas to live in our village. Okay, and we all had these traditions, and especially the food, our time, what we call Christmas time, Easter, with religion, and so on and so forth. We had different types of religion, but we're all living together like in peace. There was no difference from one or the other. But for sure, it was trade. The trade was very important, and today trade is very important. Okay, we're still trading with the US. We're still trading with the Europeans, and that's why, as you see, the trades that we do with First Nation at that time, if you look at the trade system that we put together with Canada, United States, and Mexico. They're using the same type because then they have to make an agreement. An agreement is a paper, okay? And in this trade, we put the conditions of the trade. What a trade becomes, this would become then at the same time a treaty. So the treaties in Canada we have right now, accepted by the federal government, is approximately 70 treaties, which is officially accepted by the Canadian government. Now, the accord, we call them accords today, between the French, the Canadian government, the American government, and the Mexico government is a trade agreement, and there's an accord, and it's all written down. Now, as you see, a lot in the treaties are not respected, okay? But even so, it hasn't really changed in our history. As you look at the agreement between the three countries, a lot of things are not respected either in the trades, which is the trade today as a modern accord. So you always have to sit again and to be able to arrange, especially here in Quebec, with the Americans, you have a problem with the wood. Okay, they'll apply a tax on the wood, an extra tax, but it's not in the agreement, but they still do it. So that's why you have to sit and renegotiate, and that's why it comes in. Today is not the same way. What the First Nation and the Métis and the Europeans used to do, they would sit in the wigwam around table. They would have the peace pipe on one side, and then they have the talking stick, and everybody had to see their eyes, and they discussed it because they were not respecting what they had put on paper. But today, one thing that we not do, when they signed an agreement, what the First Nation did, okay, is that the First Nation didn't trust the paper, what was on paper. So they made what? They made wampums. I don't know if you know what the wampum is. A wampum is a belt, and in the belt they put hieroglyphs that represents everything that's on the paper. So you cannot change it. It'll be there for millions of years. You cannot change the hieroglyphs which are on the wampum belt. And they were made from seashells from the east, and the white ones and the blue ones, and they made the big seashells. Right now, they're in Rome, and in Rome we have a big wampum that we gave to the Pope in 1610 when we make the Concordat of the Mi'kmaq spiritual treaty, and the wampum is still there in Rome. Okay, I think the Mi'kmaq and the Métis people would like to have it back, but when you give something, it's something that you give and you don't want to take it back. I just want to show you a few things that hasn't changed. We're still using it. Is that when the Europeans came, I just want to show you a small music instrument here. It's called the jigma. If you go to Nova Scotia, you'll see a lot of these jigmas are used in ceremonial purpose, especially for dancing powwows, okay, or potlatch, used to call them. And they're played on the knee, okay? So it's made from ashwood. Ashwood is, we're losing all our ashwood because of sickness today. That's another big change. But ashwood, you don't have to split. You just have to put it in the water, hit it, and it splits automatically. So we made canoes. We could make all kinds of things with ashwood. It was a tree that gave us a lot of things that we could do and build our wigwams and so on and so forth. Now, the French, when they seen that, they seen the sound, they started to use spoons. And then they started to make spoons out of wood, okay? A little louder than the jigma, but these spoons were played on the knee, okay, for dancing and so on and so forth. The voyageurs, the French, they wanted a lot of things to be able to trade, okay, to be able to trade with the First Nation. Now, they brought a special instrument which is still used today, and mostly in folkloric situations. I'll show you the instrument. This instrument here is called a Jawharp. They all came in little wooden boxes. It came from Siberia. The inventors of the Jawharp are from Siberia, the Siberians, and they were made out of wood. But to bring them over here, wood would break. It wasn't very tough. So they decided to make the Jawharp. Reason because they were made in wood, all our roads here were water. It fell in the water, it floated, so we could not lose our Jawharp. The Jawharp is inside. Now if you look inside here, and you took it out from the box, because you could put it on the sash, hide it in the sash, tie it to your belt, and this is the instrument that was used at that time. A lot of these instruments were traded for furs, especially beaver, any furs, and it became a trade item, and it was very important because all the natives wanted Jawharp, but they had to learn how to play the Jawharp, which the voyageurs, they knew how to play it because it came from France, it came from England, it came from Scotland. These came by the thousands, okay, to be able to trade. And at the same time, they were using them for dancing, one arm swing one way, the other arm swing the other way, and it was applied to the teeth, okay? If you put it on your lips in Quebec and in the Maritime, you call it rimbabin, it would cut your lip. So you would put it here, and with your tongue and your breath, you could play music, okay? So I'll just give you an example. So when the natives were hearing this music, they knew it was time for enjoying themselves. We did not run around fires. We sat around fires to keep ourselves warm. Now, other nations did that, run mostly in the western United States. You see mostly like Hollywood. We didn't do that. We sat around a campfire, and it hasn't changed. Today, when you go camping, what do? You don't dance around the fire. You sat around the fire, you enjoy the heat of the fire. It was the same thing for the Métis, same thing for the First Nation. We didn't dance and go woo, 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 woo around the fire. That's Hollywood, okay? Maybe some did when they wanted to go to war, but that's not something that we did. For sure, we traded many things, okay? And as you see, our top hats, these were different types of hats were used by Métis and First Nation, because now we were changing. Instead of having feathers, and you wouldn't see here in Eastern Canada 125 feathers, it was all wood. So it was very difficult for us to enter the woods with all a big headdress, and they were only used for ceremonial, especially the big headdress, which were straight up, okay, or Mi'kmaq, Malisees, or whatever. But we didn't have that right down. There wouldn't be no feathers left on it in the woods. Prairie natives, yeah, for their ceremony, they had the large headdress in Western Canada. In the United States, all the natives from there, that was their headdress. It's a little different in the East, even in Ontario, even in Quebec, Manitoba. But as soon as you hit the prairies, there, the culture changed a little bit on the way they dress. Now, one thing that they had is that the clothing, this is more European, okay, because we started to use clothing, okay, that was fabricated here, but the material was brought from Europe, and we started making shirts, and also from the trade blankets. If you see on the table here, this is a trade blanket with the color of Quebec City. What we could make from the trade blankets, we made the caban. This coat made from the blanket was made by the woman. Very warm. Now, if you would see the natives at that time, especially in the wintertime, we had to put rawhide. In other words, they call it la babiche. A lot of time, you would see some, today in our modern way, we have the frills, okay? These things here. That's not First Nation. That's cowboy, okay? Now, why did we adopt this, okay, frills? Okay, I'll explain to you why. The frills that we adopted is that because here in Eastern Canada, we had no cowboys, we had no cows. And the cowboys in the United States only came approximately in the 18th century. So what you see, cowboys and Indian, it's not quite accurate, okay? The frills were used by cowboys, yes, that stayed on the ranch or stayed on the grounds to protect the cows so they wouldn't rustle the cows or wild animals attacking the cows. And what they did, they had a coat, they had chaps, and they had a coat, and inside they had wool, okay, to protect them from the cold, and they had the frills. Reason why they had the frills on their back and their arms and on the chaps is that when it rained and they were sitting on the horse, when the horse went up, they would get wet, and when the horse hit the ground, the rain would completely come out through these frills, so they would keep dry. When the First Nations seen that these people were using frills, well, it was good for them, it was good for us. So we started to make our clothing with frills, as you see today. So today even you would see not a lot of Native people, even people which are not Native, wearing coats with frills. But that's what it really represents for the frills. In the wintertime, being only having leather, you would freeze to death. You wouldn't have been able to live. So what they used to do, you put furs with the fur inside, and on the outside you put fur on the outside, and the leather would be like a buffer in between. If you did not have that, you would completely freeze. In the moccasins, well, we had to change from using moccasins with no socks. Well, you see the small moccasin, there's no sole. That's a reason why there was no sole underneath our moccasins, is that when we walked in the forest, we didn't break no branches and you couldn't hear us coming. Now, if I have a pair of big boots with thick soles, you'll hear me coming 10 miles away. But them, they wanted to feel when they were hunting, because they had to get very close to be able to take the animal's life, okay, to feed, to dress themselves, to feed themselves. But one thing that was brought to the Americas was the gun. The gun was excellent. All the natives wanted guns because you know what it changed in their lives? Now, a lot of times they had to get very close to the animal to be able to acquire this animal for their food. The gun, you could, I would say, not 200 feet, but especially those guns were not that accurate. Okay, if you shoot there, you might hit your friend over there. So you had to be careful on the distance, but you could acquire the animal by a musket ball, okay, with black powder, with this type of gun, and you was hunting less, you had less effort, and you could acquire the animal from a greater distance. So these guns were also being used now for war. This is the bad part. If it was only for hunting and to feed their families, it would have been perfect. But these guns now were issued to First Nation to have alliance with different countries, which was France, which required this gun here, you see there, is called Charleville. The Charleville was a gun that's made by the French government and was used for soldiers and were given to First Nation as they became allied to the French. Which nation which was allied to the The French were the Hurons, the one that were allied to the French. That's why in the thing you seen, they were asking if their men could marry the one that woman, and they said they've been marrying without her. They don't see why you're asking me that permission. They've been doing it all along. Now, the other guns that they were issued by the British were called the Best West, and they were issued to the Iroquois, okay, the Five Nations. So it became, and the Hurons were part of the Five Nations, and the Iroquois too, but now they became enemies because of the gun. This is a very, now the Métis, where were the Métis in that? Métis, they all had guns. For sure, Métis having European blood and French blood, they used to come with their caban. If they had this little pointed little hat, that means they were baptized, they were allowed a gun. So for sure, when they had a war between the United States, 1812, the Métis were there, the First Nation were there with the British, fighting off well, we don't call them Americans at that time, there's no border, but the Americans had the independence from the British, and now they wanted to take Canada, which they did not make a very good job at that. They weren't able to do it. That lasted around I believe it was 4 years. This battle lasted, the War of 1812. But that's another thing. But the thing is that we wanted to trade, we wanted to develop Canada as a whole, okay? And even just to show you here, all the Mi'kmaq, they didn't have these big Bowie knives. We had little knives, okay? This you see by the blade, okay, was European. The handle was either made from wood or made from the antlers of animals. And this was called a neck knife. It was worn to the neck. The woman, the children, all the natives, because it was a tool for eating, okay? Also, today we have forks and knives, okay? But we still could use a knife if we were camping. We have a piece of bread or a piece of meat. We put a slice, and the way they used to eat, they put it in their mouth, they cut it, they cut it, they cut it. So it was something that you use continuously in the camps, okay? Either for feeding themselves, building things, repairing things on the wigwams, and so on and so forth. Another thing that are still used today, snowshoes. Snowshoes, these snowshoes are about 70 years old, maybe a little more. It was a gift that was given to me. It was made by the woman, the Montagnais of the North Shore. And you see the relationship made from rawhide, ashwood, rawhide. Some were made from maple wood at the Montagnais. And then you see all these little balls of cotton. These little balls of cotton, okay, there you see the mixture of European blood with the Montagnais, because they didn't have cotton. The cotton came from Europe. So you see they were putting these little balls to show the clan, the family clan of this. And if they lost them or somebody stole their snowshoes, well, you better get rid of these little balls because that was ownership for that. Now, you see mitts, Trappersmiths. These are my Trappersmiths. I didn't trap too much with them. I used them a lot. They were made by a lady from Saskatchewan. She made them for me. Made from moose moose skin. The moose skin, as you see, a moose at that time, when they wanted to tan a skin, they used brain. The brain of the moose, you can tan the whole skin of the moose. Once you've tanned it and you've mixed it with bear grease, and they're using a bit of from the fire, from the ash from the fire, and you make your mixture, you put that on the skin, you roll it, 4 or 5 days, you unroll it, and then you have to twist it, get the liquid out, break as much as you can the nerves in it, the tendons, and then after that, you have to put it over a fire, okay, and you smoke it, and you have a type of leather, but stiff, more stiff. At the same time, the beaver is a waterproof, because if you're trapping, you're going to trap beaver, you need a waterproof mitt, okay? And also, here we go again, the Métis flowers, we're called the flower people. Now, this is my family crest, okay? If I lose these mitts, they know they belong to me. If you steal my mitts, man, get rid of this, because it would be my signature. Also, the snowshoes were used for hunting, they were used for traveling. If we didn't have the snowshoe, we would have perished. We wouldn't have been able to exist in a country so cold with that much snow. Also, we had many other items that we could trade. One item I want just to let you know is that an item for Ontario, Quebec. You know what item that was traded the most by the Norwest Company? Okay, axe, the axe. Thousands and thousands of axes were traded and brought in for the Métis, for the French, and for the First Nation. Because you know what? Because most of them now were farmers and they had to clear the land. So the axe, and then right afterward, the bucksaw, cut the trees. The axe was something, in other words, for sure, we heard about the tomahawk. And today, the axe, we're still using the axe for many things, especially if you're going to go camping. You can't go without an axe. I never went camping without my axe. Or you can call it the tomahawk. So that's why they made a smaller version for the First Nation for trade. But the Métis, they wanted a big axe that could cut. And we had an axe which was very versatile, and I still have two here. It's a double edge. You had one that was one edge axe, and we had the double edge axe, which were used by, I think. The other thing, it was for fishing, just to make it fast. Here you have a fishing pole used for eels, salmon, and sturgeon. You can, and these are still used today in my village. It's something that we still use today in my village. This is called, in the Métis language, igog, eels. This, la fouine. This is for summer fishing, eels. This is for winter fishing on the ice. We made a hole, and the eels, they hide in the mud, and we fish them. So we acquired the knowledge from the Mi'kmaq people, especially the Métis and the Acadian people, and these two are from my village, and they were made by my family, and we're still using the same type of spears. The poles are much longer because it's deeper, depends how deep. You just keep in the mud, and when you go down, you catch the eel on these hooks coming up. So we would have fish, especially eel. We would have eels all winter long with no problem. The summertime, they were much bigger. We fish them in the ocean. We fish trout. But all these, except this one, these you had to see the fish, okay? But we did have nets. We did acquire nets, and we still had nets. I hope that what I have brought today, I know it's not long. I cannot give you all the traditions and all the culture of my people, but I hope it's enough for you to understand how today it hasn't really changed that much, okay, on the way we were before. But for sure, with everything that's modern is something that's modern. We didn't have it at that time. But even so, we're losing some of our traditions, we're losing some of our culture, and we're losing part of our language. But we're going to try, okay, as elders, to bring you as much information as we can and do research and to give a chance for us to speak to our elders. And I would like to ask you something. In the schools, you still have your grandmothers and you still have your grandfathers. Go visit them and sit down with your grandmother and your grandfather and ask them, how was it in your time? Tell me your life. They'll be amazed and they'll be happy to give you. This is knowledge from your elders. And this is the way, because us, our elders, were living with us till they died. My grandmother stayed with me. She died in my house, in the house of my parents, in other words. So I just want to bring to you that the knowledge, as knowledge keepers, are our elders. And they want to give it, but they don't know how, because they don't have this touch no more with their children, with their loved ones. So, but they're still the knowledge keepers, and with the knowledge keepers, I'm sure, try it, and you'll be mostly surprised what your grandmother and your grandfather has to bring to you as their way of life, maybe 50 years ago, 60 years ago. Thank you very much. Merci. And in the Mi'kmaq language, Awewali and Nipta Niptin.